For today's lesson, we're going to look at comparing the values of fractions to see which one is larger. We're going to go over multiple methods that are going to be very useful for us. The first is simple and mental. The second always works for all problems. The third can reduce the work if it does help us, and it will organize the numbers. The fourth can keep the numbers manageable so they don't get extremely large. Let's take a look at our first. The first is when you are given two fractions with the same denominators. In this case, we don't need to do any work. We can just look at our two numerators, and the larger numerator will always be the larger number. So in this case, the larger 5 for the 5/8 is going to be our larger fraction. And the reason is, if you think about a pizza and we cut it into 8 pieces, each pizza, because they're both cut into 8 pieces, is the same size pieces. So our denominator of 8 is telling us we have the same size pieces. So if you have 5, that is larger than 3. The other example of simple and mental is when you have common numerators and your denominators are different. This one is a little bit confusing to think about, but if you imagine, again, a pizza, this one is cut into 5 slices, and another pizza that's cut into 3 slices. Because this fraction has a smaller denominator, the pieces are bigger in size. So if you have the same amount in each, because the denominator is smaller and the pieces are bigger, that is telling us that 2/3 is a larger number. So again, it's a little bit confusing to think about, but it's because of this smaller denominator, the pieces are larger, giving us more value. Here we are asked to compare two fractions, and right away I can see that my denominators are not the same and my numerators aren't the same, so I know that I can't use my simple mental math. So we need to think about what that mental looked like. When the denominators are the same, it's simple to solve. So because we know how to change and find equal fractions, I can use this strategy to manipulate the problem. I'm going to recreate two new fractions with the same denominator. And a method that always works is multiply by the other denominator. I need a number that 5 and 3 both multiply into. So if I do 5 times 3 and 3 times 5, that will give me the same number of 15. Now before I forget, I'm going to write times 3 here and times 5 there, giving me two new fractions. I can easily see that 9/15 is larger, but the original question was 3/5 being the larger fraction. So the method that always works is multiply the denominators by the other, following your rules of multiplying the numerator and denominator by the same number, and it will give me two fractions with the same denominator to compare, and that will always work. Our third rule is a great way to compare fractions sometimes, but also organize when we order multiple fractions. So here I can see that my simple and mental won't work because the denominators are not the same. And so I'm going to have to change these fractions with rule number 2 of multiplying by the opposite denominator to find my new fractions. Now I can actually avoid that entire step. If I look at my fractions, I know that 5/8 is more than half, because 4/8 would be half. And I know that 1/3 is less than half, because 1.5 is half of 3. So for this reason, I've compared the fractions. 5/8 is more than half and must be larger than 1/3 because it's less than half. So here I'm comparing two more fractions. 3/4 is more than half, and 2/3 is more than half. So this method won't work. And in this case, your next step is to switch to rule number 2 and use our method that will always work. I'm going to multiply by the opposite denominator, making sure I get the numerators, and compare my fractions by creating two fractions with the same denominators to find my answer. So using the more than half, less than half sometimes works, but it's also going to be a great tool for when we order multiple fractions. So for this last one, we're going to look at a strategy to keep the numbers manageable. So first I can look at rule number 1 and see that I can't do it mentally because my denominators aren't the same. Thinking about my third rule of organizing the numbers, I can see that 2/5 is less than half and 12/25 is less than half. So that's not going to work for us. My third option is the rule that always works, where I can multiply by the opposite denominator to find common fractions. But as you can see here, the numbers I'm going to be working with are extremely large, and I don't know my 25 facts mentally. So there has to be a simpler way, and sometimes there is. This doesn't always work, but sometimes it does, and this is where having strong math facts are going to help you. I know that 5 times 5 is 25, so I can simply change 2/5 and keep 12/25 the same to compare my fractions to find 12/25 being larger. So looking at our new problem, 8/10 and 3/5, going through my rules. Number 1, mental isn't going to work, the denominators aren't the same. I know that 8/10 is more than half and 3/5 is more than half, so that's not going to work. And I could do multiplying by my opposite denominators, but my facts and using this of keeping numbers manageable is going to help me do this problem a little bit faster. I know that 10 divided by 2 will give me 5. So I can leave 2/5 the same. Now the only reason we can do that is because I can divide 8 by 2 at the same time to compare my answers. If I couldn't do 8 divided by 2, then I couldn't follow through with this. If we compare that to our previous problem, we can see that I could divide 25 by 5, but I wouldn't be able to do 12 divided by 5, so that wouldn't have worked. So again, looking here, dividing by 2 will work. Now, I also could have multiplied this by 2, erasing what I did before, to have 6/10 to compare to my 8/10. But either way, it's keeping the numbers manageable and easier to use. And this again will be an excellent strategy for when we are ordering fractions as well. So again, looking at the list, I would suggest going back and reviewing this either today or another day, because these are multiple skills that I threw at you at once, but they are all very useful for when we're comparing and ordering fractions.